So, Generation Zero has its fair share of weapon pack DLCs, and I understand that these days money doesn't grow on trees. So I thought I'd put together some videos going over each individual weapon pack in game and going over everything there is to know. Things like what weapons come with said pack, a detailed breakdown of each weapon looking at pros and cons and whether or not augments can fix them, and lastly my opinion, having been an owner of all the DLC packs for quite some time now. So in this one, let's take a look at the US weapons pack and see whether or not it's right for you. So the US weapons pack contains 3 weapons: the N16 assault rifle, the N60 light machine gun, and lastly the N9 handgun. And we'll be covering everything to know about these weapons shortly, but as for the price, it will set you back $5.50 Australian dollars. Now, sorry, I don't know what it is for everyone's currency or everyone's country. I'm just going to do it for my currency, so I do apologize. But $5.50 Aussie dollar will get you 3 weapons and a bunch of 5 crown specific attachments to grind for in game, which is pretty darn awesome if you ask me. But enough waffling, let's get straight into the individual weapon breakdowns and then take a look if this pack is worth your hard-earned cash. Let's talk a bit about each weapon, going over their overall performance, pros and cons, and whether or not weapon augmentation can fix their shortcomings, if they have any, and which can make these weapons even better. Now, additionally, before we jump into this, I just want to say that I will be using the 5 crown variants of all these weapons, just because that's the variant you're going to be using the most, so it makes sense to use the best variant for testing. But anyways, let's get started. So up first, we have the N16 assault rifle. Now, if I'm being honest guys, I got this pack years ago when it first came out, and it was rubbish in comparison to my experimental weapons. So I never really used it until the Showdown update came out, and they completely changed how the rifle looked. So I went, hunting around for the 5 crown variant to check out, and let me tell you, boy howdy is this a good gun. The N16 features a high rate of fire, low recoil with good accuracy, and has pretty darn decent damage by default, even though it's only chambered in 5.56 and not 7.62. It also comes with a stock magazine capacity of 30, which is fairly decent and can be boosted all the way up to 45 with a 5 crown extended magazine. As for attachments, other than the extended mag, it can support a silencer, a barrel extender, vision modules, red dot sight 1 to 4 times, 4 to 8 times scopes. So if scopes are your thing, then be my guest, but honestly, in my opinion, this has one of the best iron sights in game. All it needs is the glowing line at the front and it'll be perfect. So with specs and whatnot out of the way, let's talk about the overall performance. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not the most damaging weapon in game, but it's still really good. Able to make quick work out of the smaller machines and even puts up a good fight against larger machines like tanks and wolves, etc. Now, keep in mind, this is just the default weapon without any augments or barrel mods or anything, literally just stock as it comes as a 5 crown. Now, me personally, I feel like it doesn't deal enough damage for me to even consider using it instead of my PM71, which is obviously my go-to for taking down any larger machines, as it's the heaviest hitting weapon in game by far. So I only tend to use my N16 for the smaller class of machines like runners and hunters, and honestly, that works perfectly fine for me. However, if you did want to use it for the larger enemies, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised by the N16's performance. As for weapon augmentation, my recommendation to you guys will always be Titan Toppler and Small Fryer for primaries, as you can't beat the extra damage buffs they give you in game. The N16 was already a beast for taking down smaller enemies, but with an extra 50% damage on top of that for the smaller class machines, this weapon becomes lethal. As for Titan Toppler, 20% extra damage to the larger machines is a huge buff and works very well, but like I said previously, there are much better weapons in game to use to take down the bigger enemies, however, to each their own. And if you want to use the N16 with Titan Toppler to take down the big boys, you're more than capable of doing just that. Now, if you've watched my video on the best augments in game, you'll know I don't really recommend many other primary augments for in game, like for your weapons, but for your support class, there are a few you can choose from to benefit this weapon. Oversized mag is great, as you'll get a 95 round magazine before reloading, and with the N16 already having an almost non-existent recoil, the additional 200 recoil that this augmentation gives you won't really be that hard to deal with in return. Quick Learner is another good one you can use, especially if you're using this like I am, as there's significantly more smaller machines than larger ones in game, so using Quick Learner with Small Fryer on the N16 and you'll be gaining heaps of levels in no time. But for those of you who don't really care about levels, Hit and Run is a really good pair for the N16 as you gain an extra 40% to your sprint, which honestly comes in handy in most fights. And that's currently the main support augmentation I use for my N16, and it hasn't let me down yet. But look, everyone plays the game differently, so you might utilize other augmentations, and that's perfectly fine. Those are just my recommendations to you. Lastly, it is also worth noting that you're not really going to get any extra benefit from using the experimental rounds on the N16, as 5.56 only has two ammo options, that being the heat and corrosive rounds, which are going to deal more damage to one specific thing on a machine and no damage to the others. So it's really not worth it in my opinion. Just save your mats, as there are limited amounts of armor and components on machines, so the buff that these rounds will give you will only work for, let's say, 15 to 20% of the fight with said machine before they become completely pointless, so just keep this in mind. Next up, let's take a look at the N60 light machine gun. This iconic weapon features a medium rate of fire, average damage, but where it truly shines compared to most LMGs in Generation 0 is its handling. Having practically zero recoil and good accuracy across close to medium distances. The N60 is also chambered in 7.62, which means it is much better than the N16 being chambered in 5.56, so that's a bonus. But naturally, it's an LMG to an assault rifle, there's no real comparison there. But the attachments are the same as any other LMG in game, that being the red dot sight, silencer, extended mag, and compensator. A thing to note with the N60 though, like most other default LMGs in Generation 0, is the fact that it can only hold 50 rounds stock, needing you to grind for the 5 crown extended mag to bring it back up to 250. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a must, but if you don't mind reloading every 10 to 15 seconds, but look, for the rest of us, the 99.9% of players, you'll want to grind for that much larger magazine. Now, unlike the N16, the N60 thankfully comes with the green line in the front end of the iron sights, which makes it very nice, and I just really wish the N16 had it, but I digress. Moving on now to performance, and all things considered, the N60 stock is bang average, I will admit. It handles smaller machines and hunters very well as expected, but does struggle coming up against things like tanks and firebirds. Wolves and harvesters aren't really a good metric to go off, as they have like pretty much zero health in comparison to the others, but yes, the N60 stock does struggle a bit taking down higher class tanks and firebirds, needing an extra few hundred rounds when compared to something like the PM71, so keep this in mind if you're looking for something that can deal lots of damage in a short time frame, as the N60 isn't quite capable of doing just that. Now, whilst we're still on topic of lacking a bit of damage, this is where good old fashioned weapon augmentations come in handy. Chances are, if your weapon is lacking in some departments, the augmentations can fix it. So this leads me to choose once again Titan Toppler, as it only struggles with the larger enemies, and you'll get an additional 20% damage buff to said larger enemies, which should fix the problem, or at least save you a few hundred rounds in the process. Now, I can't believe I'm even going to suggest this, but if you didn't want Titan Toppler and you couldn't care less about how many extra rounds you'll go through, then maybe something like EMP detonation might work for you, as at least this way the enemies will be temporarily shut down during half of the fight, making those weak spots a million times easier for you to hit. But that's only if you're struggling, you know. But look, I would still recommend Titan Toppler as the go-to for the N60, but look, be my guest, try some stuff out, whatever works for you, right? Now, as for your support slot, this one is less of an issue because none of them really do much to benefit or help this weapon, as majority of the support augments just boost accuracy and help with recoil, which one, you can do on your own, and two, you can boost in the game skill trees. So I would probably just go with Hit and Run for additional sprinting, or Oversized Magazine for doubling the magazine capacity. And yeah, I'm probably just going to let you guys decide for this one, because honestly, for me, you could just leave the support slot empty and it wouldn't really make much difference in how the N60 operates, at least in my opinion. Lastly, the experimental ammo type you can use with this weapon is actually rather good. Well, at least one of them is. So You can choose from 7.62 shock rounds or tar rounds, but please, for the love of God, don't use tar rounds. All they do, literally, all they do is slow an enemy down. And let's face it, machines in this game aren't exactly fast, so why this is even a thing, I literally don't know. But anyways, the experimental shock rounds are pretty darn dope. If you've ever used the experimental KVM59 and you've seen what shock rounds can do. So just pretty much imagine using the KVM59 but on the N60 instead. Great for crowd control and does some pretty darn good damage also, if I may say so. However, the only downside is for new players, you're going to be needing to grind the game for a while to get enough resources to craft these bad boys, so keep this in mind. Now remember, Kilroy's golden rule, no tar rounds. Last but certainly not least, we have the N9 handgun. Now, if you like high damaging pistols, then this is the one for you. It's arguably one of, if not the best pistol in Generation 0, with high damage, fast fire rate, awesome handling, not to mention non-existent recoil. And I know this isn't really a stat to go off, but honestly, I don't know, it's just super satisfying to use. There's something about this weapon. Anyways, I'm getting off track. The N9 fires 9mm handgun rounds in-game and only has 3 equipable accessories, that being the extended magazine and either a silencer or compensator. Sadly, no pistol scopes for this one. It would have been cool to get some really nice pistol scopes, but anyways. Its default magazine is a whopping 15 rounds and can be boosted all the way up to 26 with a 5 round extended mag, which is wild to think that a pistol will have more rounds than some of the assault rifles in game, but moving on. Now, I'm not really sure as to why the N9 and the N60 both feature the glowing green mark on the end of the iron sights, but for some reason the N16 doesn't, and it irks me to say the least. Like, why 2 out of 3? Why not the N16, devs? Moving on to the overall performance of the N9, and honestly, for a pistol, you'd be pleasantly surprised at how well this operates. It has no trouble taking down smaller enemies such as runners, lynxes, and even hunters. Now don't get me wrong, the hunters do take more or less like 3/4 to a whole mag to take down depending on the actual class of hunter. But look, that's pretty darn good for a pistol. Let's put it this way, I would much rather use the N9 than the experimental Glock 17 any day. God, that pistol is garbage. Now, personally, I always use the silencer on the N9. Don't ask me why, I just like the sound, okay? But in all seriousness, I genuinely don't see any difference in performance using the silencer than me running the compensator, so keep this in mind. All jokes aside though, guys, the N9 is a solid pistol and I've definitely had a blast running around in game testing it out for this video. Now, as for augments, this one again had me puzzled, and just bear with me here, right? Because I could just give you the same answer I've been giving you this whole video and, you know, be like, hey, small fire on this weapon, you know? Or do we try the final shot pistol augmentation, which gives the last bullet in the mag a 600% damage boost? So I decided to test it. So I grabbed my N9, I ran into the farmlands region, I found a military class harvester, it was the only thing I could fucking find, I'm so sorry, and I shot it. I shot it once, then I used my binoculars, I checked the tech view on the harvester, and noticed with a single shot, I did 1% of its overall health. So, quick math, if one shot does 1% of its health, then final shot would deal 6% of the harvester's health. So, going off that, I have 26 shots in my N9 handgun, so if I shot all but one into the harvester, I would deal 25% of its overall health, and then with final shot, a further 6%. So all in all, with final shot, I can take down a military class harvester, the second worst class harvester in game, in just 3 full magazines and 9 bullets from the 4th. Utter dog shit. I don't know what drugs the devs were on when they came up with this idea, but geez, was it a waste of everyone's time and resources. So after all that testing, I'm just going to give you my usual spiel and say probably, you know, you best off not wasting mats on something like Titan Toppler, as the damage just isn't there, but I seriously would recommend Small Fryer, as an extra 50% damage buff to smaller enemies would go a long way. Additionally though, I could see the appeal to someone using EMP detonation to shut down the enemies, then switching to something more powerful to finish them off. So that is also another good option if you didn't just want to use like an EMP cell or an EMP rocket round, but once again, to each their own, I guess. Now, it is also worth mentioning that this pistol can use both heat and shock experimental 9mm handgun ammo types, which again, I wouldn't really recommend you use heat rounds due to it only being useful for a small part of your overall fight with said machine, but it's definitely not the worst you could use. Hashtag tar rounds. However, I would honestly save your materials for something better like shock rounds, which will do the same effect as an experimental KVM59. So yeah, probably recommend using shock over any other experimental ammo type in game, but you do you. Alrighty, so we got through all the nitty gritty. Now we come to the fun part. Would I recommend you buying the US weapons pack in Generation 0? And the answer is a big old yes. The weapons in this pack are some of the best DLC weapons you can get from all of the packs in Generation 0. Not to mention, they are some of the most iconic weapons of our time. I mean, you show someone the N60 or the N16 and they know exactly what it is, where it was used. But besides that, these three weapons pack a big old punch. The N9 handgun is arguably one of, if not the best pistol in game, and yes, I know I just hurt the Clork 17 cultists, but it's true. The N16, probably one of the most well-rounded weapons in game, being able to take on a variety of roles and utilize many different augmentations to suit different needs and scenarios. And the N60 is probably the only kind of negative thing I could say about this pack, if I'm being honest, as for an LMG, the overall performance can't really keep up with some of the other LMGs in game. And I'm not even talking about like DLC LMGs, I'm just talking about like the base game LMGs. So if you're looking for an LMG, like the best damaging LMG, sorry, then you might have to pass on this one, like in all honesty. But other than that, the only other thing I would change or like to see change from this pack would be the glowing green tip on the N16 front iron sight. As the other two weapons in this pack have it, for some reason the N16 missed out, which makes me sad because those irons are practically perfect, so the green line would be the cherry on top for me. Other than that, guys, for $5.50 Australian dollars, you can't go wrong with the US weapons pack. Now, when you quickly break things down, especially the cost, even if you only play with these things for, like these weapons for an hour, the cost drops to something around 9.1 cents a minute, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And then what's even crazier is when you think of just how long you're actually going to play or need to play to get the 5 crowns. No joke, I've probably sank 100+ hours with this DLC using all the weapons, and it brings the cost down to something ridiculous like 1/10 of a cent every minute. So the value for money is definitely there. So if you love the game and are willing to grind for the 5 crown variants and attachments, can't go wrong. But yeah, so if you're looking to spice things up a bit, this will make a fine addition to your machine destroying arsenal in game. Alrighty guys, so that's going to do it for this video on the US weapons pack. I hope you all enjoyed. Now, it goes without saying, there will be a video like this on all of the remaining DLC packs, so if you have a pack you'd like to see me cover in the next video, let me know in the comments below. And whilst you're there, be sure to smash that like and subscribe button, as it helps push these videos out to more awesome viewers like yourselves. But enough from me, take it easy guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Happy hunting.